네, 여러분 어떻게 잘 보셨어요? 스탠리 밀그램 교수의 그 밀그램 프로젝트라는 영화를 통해서 우리 권유에 대한 복종 실험을 했었죠. 사실 이제 여기까지 이르게 되면 우리 많은 것들을 생각하게 돼요. 좀 전에 기상학, 생물학, 물리학, 역학 등에서 동조 현상이라는 것을 우리는 알 수 있었어요, 그죠? 메트로놈이나 또는 새나 물고기들을 통해서 동조화 현상 이런 것들을 알게 됐는데, 사실은 이제 심리학이나 사약에서 동조 현상이 마찬가지로 발견이 된다는 거죠. 또 솔로몬 애쉬 교수의 동조 실험 어떻게 생각하시나요, 여러분? 마치 이제 그 우리 고사성어 중에 보면 지록유마 뭐 이런 말들이 생각나죠. 이게 사슴을 보고 말이라고 다들 이야기를 하는 거야. 그랬더니 말이라고 거짓말을 고하는 거죠. 마치 우리 옛날 이야기 보면은 임금님기는 당나귀기 뭐 그런 거랑 비슷하죠. 그 진실을 말할 수가 없는 거죠. 그런 것들이 생겨난다는 얘기죠. 그게 이제 왜 그럴까라고 했더니 우리는 권위에 대해서 복종을 한다는 거죠. 근데 거기에는 이제 중요한 게 한 가지가 숨겨져 있죠. 즉 책임이 면책된다 그러면 우리는 양심에 그죠 반하는 행동도 할 수 있다는 거죠. 그게 이제 예전에 나치 독일이 또 우리 옆에 있는 일본 제국주의자들이 그렇게 아무 꺼리낌 없이 할 수 있었던 거, 그런 이유가 아니었을까. 그리고 현재도 비슷하죠. 버마에서 군부 그죠 군인들이 그 버마 시민들을 그렇게 학살하는 걸 보고 옆에 비슷하죠. 뭐 중국도 보면 유구르를 그렇게, 사실 이런 인간이 인간에 대해서 하지 말아야 될 일들이 있잖아요. 과학기술이 발달하면 우리가 과학기술이라고 하는 이름으로 이제 많은 베너핏, 혜택도 많이 생겨나겠죠. 근데 그것에 반비례해서 부정적인 위험도 더 많이 늘어날 수 있기 때문에 우리는 한번 생각을 해봐야 될 것 같습니다. 자, 인공지능과 초연결 사회. 앞으로 인공지능에 대한 과학기술은 이러한 연결 사회를 정말 슈퍼, 울트라, 그죠? 커넥티드 소사이어티로 만들어줄 거예요. 인공지능을 가능하게 하는 기술 중에 하나가 빅데이터거든요. 빅데이터의 어떤 4V라는 게 있어요. 네 가지 V가 있는데, 첫 번째 V는 그 크기죠. 볼륨 자체가 엄청나게 이제 커진다는 거예요. 예전에 플로피 디스크 1메가바이트, 2메가바이트의 어떤 그런 기억 용량을 갖고 있다 그러면 지금은 테라바이트 뭐 그죠? 이상의 어떤 천문학적인 어떤 그런 볼륨을 가지고 우리는 데이터를 저장할 수가 있어요. 두 번째는 그 데이터가 저장되는 형식도 굉장히 다양해졌다는 거죠. 옛날에는 우리가 정형적인 데이터만을 우리는 수집할 수 있었어요. 그죠? 고객 신상 데이터, 매출 데이터, 재고 데이터, 또 회계 데이터 이런 것처럼. 근데 지금은 우리가 이제 동영상을 올리거나 다운받거나 또는 음악을 듣거나 메시지를 서로 주고받고 소셜 미디어에서 채팅을 하거나 또는 간단하게 우리가 구글 그죠? 맵을 켜고 낯선 곳을 찾아간다든지 또는 게시물에 대해서 좋아요라고 올리는 그 순간 그죠? 바로 우리가 가진 어떤 비정형 데이터들이 바로 이러한 빅데이터의 수집이 된다는 거죠. 그게 이제 다양성이라는 측면에서 variety 두 번째 B고요. 세 번째 B는 또 velocity, 즉 속도가 엄청나게 이제는 빨라졌다는 거죠. 예전에는 그러한 어떤 그 정보의 활용 주기가 보통은 이제 설문지 돌리고 수집하고 이러면서 한 몇 주, 몇 달은 걸리고 아무리 빠르게 한다고 해도 수시간에 불과했는데 지금은 분초 단위로 그것이 우리가 수집한 그 빅데이터가 활용될 수 있다는 거죠. 여기에 또 하나가 뭐가 있죠? 네 번째 V는 바로 value, 가치라고 할 수 있는 거죠. 사실은 많은 그 빅데이터 전문가들이 주목하는 게 바로 네 번째 V예요. 여기서 이제 인간을 위한 가치냐 아니면 또 다른 가치냐에 따라서 많이 달라지겠죠. 우리가 활용하기 나름인데 it depends on us, 그죠? 우리한테 달린 문제라고 할 수 있겠죠. 자, 우리 아마 일반 대중이 빅데이터라든지 인공지능이라든지 여기 대해서 새삼 느끼게 된 게 아마 이 사건이 아니었을까 싶어요. 그죠? 몇 년 전 이야기인데 이세돌하고 인간 이세돌이죠. 인간 이세돌과 인공지능 알파고의 바둑 대결이었죠. 우리 화면상으로는 마치 사람 둘이 두고 있는 것처럼 보이지만 이세돌은 이분이시죠. 한국의 이세돌이고 여기 있는 이분은 사람이 대신 이렇게 그 바둑돌만 옮겨줄 뿐이지 그것에 의사결정을 하고 그랬던 어디에다 둘까 수를 둘까라고 하는 것은 바로 알파고죠. 영국을 대표해서 이렇게 나왔죠. 알파고라고 하는 인공지능이었어요. 2015년에 구글 딥마인드가 개발한 인공지능 바둑 프로그램이었고 심층 신경망 기술을 이용해서 집중학습을 통했고 실제 프로바둑 기사들이 둔 3천만 건의 대국 기보를 입력해서 그죠? 불과 그 1년 동안 11만 게임을 둔 거죠. 그러면서 이제 GPU를 또 구동하면서 사실은 이제 컴퓨터 하나로만 한 게 아니죠. 엄청나게 많은 컴퓨터들이 서로 연결돼서 그죠? 확률 싸움을 한 거죠. 여기다 두면 이길 확률, 질 확률 해서 최적의 수를 두어가는 그런 거였죠. 우리 인간 이세돌하고 종합전적은 어떻게 됐나요? 기억나시는 분 있나요 혹시? 우리 인간이 어떻게 한 판이라도 이겼을까요? 아니면 완전히 졌을까요? 한 판은 이겼어요. 근데 이게 대단한 게 이 이세돌 이후에 알파고하고 둬서 이긴 그 당시에 중국의 모 기사가 내가 뒀더라면 다 이길 텐데라고 했는데 그 사람도 했어요. 근데 다 졌어요. 그러니까 이세돌이 엄청나게 훌륭한 기사라는 게 증명이 된 사건이기도 하고 인간이 최초로 이렇게 인공지능을 이긴 말하자면 체스도 도고 막 여러 가지 했거든요. 그 중에서 바둑에서 이긴 그러니까 그 여러 가지 게임 중에서 바둑이 유일했고 인간이 이긴 게임이 그 이세돌이 유일하게 이긴 사람이에요. 자, 여기서 우리가 이제 초연결 사회와 법, 그 중에서 인공지능하고 우리가 법을 생각했을 때 이 문제가 이제 마지막으로 한번 우리가 이야기를 해볼 수 있겠네요. 인공지능이 그렇다면 이 초연결 사회에서 우리를 더 나은 사람으로 만들어줄 수 있을까라는 문제입니다. 자, 스튜어트 러셀의 테드 영상을 같이 보면서 이번 강의는 한번 마무리를 지어보도록 하겠습니다.
This is Lee Sedol. Lee Sedol is one of the world's greatest Go players, and he's having what my friends in Silicon Valley call a holy cow moment. A moment where we realize that AI is actually progressing a lot faster than we expected. So humans have lost on the Go board. What about the real world? Well, the real world is much bigger, much more complicated than the Go board. It's a lot less visible, but it's still a decision problem. And if we think about some of the technologies that are coming down the pike, so Noriko mentioned that reading is not yet happening in machines, at least with understanding, but that will happen. And when that happens, very soon afterwards, machines will have read everything that the human race has ever written. And that will enable machines, along with the ability to look further ahead than humans can, as we've already seen in Go. If they also have access to more information, they'll be able to make better decisions in the real world than we can. So is that a good thing? Well, I hope so. Our entire civilization, everything that we value, is based on our intelligence. And if we had access to a lot more intelligence, then there's really no limit to what the human race can do. And I think this could be, as some people have described it, the biggest event in human history. So why are people saying things like this, that AI might spell the end of the human race? Is this a new thing? Is it just Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking? Actually, no. This idea has been around for a while. Here's a quotation. Even if we could keep the machines in a subservient position, for instance, by turning off the power at strategic moments, and I'll come back to that turning off the power idea later on, we should, as a species, feel greatly humbled. So who said this? This is Alan Turing in 1951. Alan Turing, as you know, is the father of computer science and in many ways the father of AI as well. So if we think about this problem, the problem of creating something more intelligent than your own species, we might call this the gorilla problem. Because gorillas' ancestors did this a few million years ago, and now we could ask the gorillas, was this a good idea? So here they are having a meeting to discuss whether it was a good idea, and after a little while they conclude, no, this was a terrible idea. Our species is in dire straits. In fact, you can see the existential sadness in their eyes. So this queasy feeling that making something smarter than your own species is maybe not a good idea. What can we do about that? Well, really nothing, except stop doing AI. And because of all the benefits that I mentioned, and because I'm an AI researcher, I'm not having that. I actually want to be able to keep doing AI. So we actually need to nail down the problem a bit more. What exactly is the problem? Why is better AI possibly a catastrophe? So here's another quotation. We had better be quite sure that the purpose put into the machine is the purpose which we really desire. So this was said by Norbert Wiener in 1960, actually shortly after he watched one of the very early learning systems learn to play checkers better than its creator. But this could equally have been said by King Midas. So King Midas said, I want everything I touch to turn to gold, and he got exactly what he asked for. That was the purpose that he put into the machine, so to speak. And then his food and his drink and his relatives turned to gold, and he died in misery and starvation. So we'll call this the King Midas problem, of stating an objective which is not in fact truly aligned with what we want. In modern terms, we call this the value alignment problem. So putting in the wrong objective actually is not the only part of the problem. There's another part. If you put an objective into a machine, even something as simple as fetch the coffee, the machine says to itself, well, how might I fail to fetch the coffee? Someone might switch me off. Okay, I have to take steps to prevent that. I will disable my off switch. I will do anything to defend myself against interference with this objective that I've been given. So this single-minded pursuit in a very defensive mode of an objective that is in fact not aligned with the true objectives of the human race, that's the problem that we face. And in fact, that's the high-value takeaway from this talk. If you want to remember one thing, it's that you can't fetch the coffee if you're dead. Okay, it's very simple. Just remember that. Repeat it to yourself 3 times a day. And in fact, this is exactly the plot of 2001. HAL has an objective, a mission, which is not aligned with the objectives of the humans. And that leads to this conflict. Unfortunately, HAL is not super intelligent. He's pretty smart, but eventually Dave outwits him and manages to switch him off. But we might not be so lucky. So what are we going to do? I'm trying to redefine AI to get away from this classical notion of machines that intelligently pursue objectives. There are 3 principles involved. The first one is a principle of altruism, if you like, that the robot's only objective is to maximize the realization of human objectives, of human values. And by values here, I don't mean touchy-feely, goody-goody values. I just mean whatever it is that the human would prefer their life to be like. And so this actually violates Asimov's law that the robot has to protect its own existence. It has no interest in preserving its existence whatsoever. The second law is a law of humility, if you like. And this turns out to be really important to make robots safe. It says that the robot does not know what those human values are. So it has to maximize them, but it doesn't know what they are. And that avoids this problem of single-minded pursuit of an objective. This uncertainty turns out to be crucial. Now, in order to be useful to us, it has to have some idea of what we want. It obtains that information primarily by observation of human choices. So our own choices reveal information about what it is that we prefer our life to be like. So those are the three principles. Let's see how that applies to this question of can you switch the machine off, as Turing suggested. So here's a PR2 robot. This is one that we have in our lab. And it has a big red off switch right on the back. And the question is it going to let you switch it off? So if we do it the classical way, we give it the objective of fetch the coffee. I must fetch the coffee. I can't fetch the coffee if I'm dead, so obviously the PR2 has been listening to my talk. And so it says, okay, therefore, I must disable my off switch. And probably taser all the other people in Starbucks who might interfere with me. So this seems to be inevitable, right? This kind of failure mode seems to be inevitable, and it follows from having a concrete, definite objective. So what happens if the machine is uncertain about the objective? Well, it reasons in a different way. It says, okay, the human might switch me off, but only if I'm doing something wrong. Well, I don't really know what wrong is, but I know that I don't want to do it. So that's the first and second principles right there. So I should let the human switch me off. And in fact, you can calculate the incentive that the robot has to allow the human to switch it off, and it's directly tied to the degree of uncertainty about the underlying objective. And then when the machine is switched off, that third principle comes into play. It learns something about the objectives that it should be pursuing because it learns what it did wasn't right. In fact, we can, with suitable use of Greek symbols, as mathematicians usually do, we can actually prove a theorem that says that such a robot is provably beneficial to the human. You are provably better off with a machine that's designed in this way than without it. So this is a very simple example, but this is the first step in what we're trying to do with human-compatible AI. Now, this third principle, I think, is the one that you're probably scratching your head. You're probably thinking, well, I behave badly. I don't want my robot to behave like me, right? I sneak down in the middle of the night and I take stuff from the fridge. I do this, I do that. There's all kinds of things that you don't want the robot to be doing. But in fact, it doesn't quite work that way. Just because you behave badly doesn't mean the robot's going to copy your behavior. It's going to understand your motivations and maybe help you resist them if appropriate. But it's still difficult, right? What we're trying to do, in fact, is to allow machines to predict for any person and for any possible life that they could live and the lives of everybody else, which would they prefer? And there are many, many difficulties involved in doing this, and I don't expect that this is going to get solved very quickly. And the real difficulties, in fact, are us. As I have already mentioned, we behave badly, and in fact, some of us are downright nasty. Now, the robot, as I said, doesn't have to copy the behavior. The robot does not have any objective of its own. It's purely altruistic. And it's not designed just to satisfy the desires of one person, the user, but in fact, it has to respect the preferences of everybody. So it can deal with a certain amount of nastiness, and it can even understand that your nastiness, for example, you may take bribes as a passport official because you need to feed your family and send your kids to school. And it can understand that. It doesn't mean it's going to steal. In fact, it'll just help you send your kids to school. We are also computationally limited. So Lee Sedol is a brilliant Go player, but he's still lost. So if we look at his actions, he took an action that lost the game. That doesn't mean that he wanted to lose. So in order to understand his behavior, we actually have to invert through a model of human cognition that includes our computational limitations. And that's a very complicated model, but it's still something that we can work on understanding. Probably the most difficult part from my point of view as an AI researcher is the fact that there are lots of us. And so the machine has to somehow trade off, weigh up the preferences of many different people. And there are different ways to do that. Economists, sociologists, moral philosophers have understood that, and we are actively looking for collaboration. So let's have a look and see what happens when you get that wrong. So you can have a conversation, for example, with your intelligent personal assistant that might be available in a few years' time. Think of it as Siri on steroids. So Siri says your wife called to remind you about dinner tonight. And of course you've forgotten. What dinner? What are you talking about? Your 20th anniversary at 7 p.m. I can't do that. I'm meeting with the Secretary General at 7:30. How could this have happened? Well, I did warn you, but you overrode my recommendation. Well, what am I going to do? I can't just tell him I'm too busy. Don't worry. I arranged for his plane to be delayed. Some kind of computer malfunction. Really? You can do that? He sends his profound apologies and looks forward to meeting you for lunch tomorrow. So, the values here, there's a slight mistake going on, right? This is clearly following my wife's values, which is happy wife, happy life. Right? It could go the other way. So you could come home after a hard day's work and you say, okay, I have a long day. Yes, I didn't even have time for lunch. You must be very hungry. Starving, yeah, could you make some dinner? There's something I need to tell you. There are humans in South Sudan who are in more urgent need than you. So I'm leaving, make your own dinner. So we have to solve these problems, and I'm looking forward to working on them. There are reasons for optimism. One reason is that there is a massive amount of data, because remember I said they're going to read everything the human race has ever written. Most of what we write about is human beings doing things, and then other people getting upset about it. So there's a massive amount of data to learn from. There's also a very strong economic incentive to get this right. So imagine your domestic robots at home, you're late from work again, and the robot has to feed the kids, and the kids are hungry, and there's nothing in the fridge. And the robot sees the cat. And the robot hasn't quite learned the human value function properly, so it doesn't understand the sentimental value of the cat outweighs the nutritional value of the cat. And then, so then what happens? Well, it happens like this. Deranged robot cooks kitty for family dinner. That one incident would be the end of the domestic robot industry. So there's a huge incentive to get this right long before we reach super intelligent machines. So to summarize, I'm actually trying to change the definition of AI so that we have provably beneficial machines. And the principles are machines that are altruistic, that want to achieve only our objectives, but that are uncertain about what those objectives are, and will watch all of us to learn more about what it is that we really want. And hopefully, in the process, we will learn to be better people. Thank you very much.
So interesting, Stuart. We're going to stand here a bit because I think they're setting up for our next speaker. So, a couple of questions. So, the idea of programming in ignorance seems intuitively really powerful. As you get to superintelligence, what's going to stop a robot reading literature and discovering this idea that knowledge is actually better than ignorance, and still just shifting its own goals and kind of rewriting that programming?
Yes, so we want it to learn more, as I said, about our objectives. It'll only become more certain as it becomes more correct, right? So the evidence is there, and it's going to be designed to interpret it correctly. It will understand, for example, that books are very biased in the evidence they contain. They only talk about kings and princes and elite white male people doing stuff. So it's a complicated problem, but as it learns more about our objectives, it will become more and more useful to us.
And you couldn't just boil it down to one law, hardwired in. If any human ever tries to switch me off, I comply, I comply.
Absolutely not. That would be a terrible idea. So imagine that, you have a self-driving car and you want to send your 5-year-old off to preschool, right? Do you want your 5-year-old to be able to switch off the car while it's driving along? Probably not. So it needs to understand how rational and sensible the person is. The more rational the person, the more willing you are to be switched off. If the person is completely random or even malicious, then you're less willing to be switched off.
All right, Stuart, can I just say, I really, really hope you figure this out for us. Thank you so much for that talk. That was amazing. Thank you.